Hello and welcome to Tar Heel Teachers at Home. I'm Marlo Artis. I'm the moderator of the program. Tar Heel Teachers at Home is an interview series focused on engaging North Carolinians in conversations around education. Each week, I'm happily joined by a wonderful panel of educators, each one representing a particular subsection of education. We'll start our introductions with our elementary school co-host.
Hi, I'm Kelley Wilson, and I live in Watauga County. I've taught in Watauga County public schools for 15 years, and I also have been an adjunct instructor at Appalachian State University. I currently am also a learning coach with North Carolina Education Corps, serving the western end of North Carolina.
So glad to have you here, Kelley, as a guest co-host. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Arnita. My name is Arnita Morris, and I'm currently a teacher in Craven County Schools. I teach 8th grade math and Math 1. I'm a military spouse, so I've taught in North Carolina for 9 years, and I've taught in Craven County. This will be my 4th year, and I'm proud to serve as the Craven County Schools Teacher of the Year for this year.
Awesome. Arnita, we're so glad to have you on board as well. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Link, and I am a 12th year social studies teacher in the Chapel Hill-Carrboro City Schools, also a parent of a first grader. And I am proud to be the Boroughs Welcome Fund North Central Region Teacher of the Year, and delighted to be here with you this evening, Senator Ballard.
Brian, thank you so much for returning to the show, and congratulations on being named a Regional Teacher of the Year.
Thank you so much, Marlo.
Good evening, everyone. I am Steve Lassiter, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Programs and Services with Pitt County Schools, and I'm excited to be here. This is my 17th year in education, and I love every single moment of it, even the moments that have been extremely challenging over the past 2 years. I am the 2015 Wells Fargo, North Carolina Principal of the Year, and you can find me on Twitter using the handle @SteveLassiter.
Awesome. Dr. Lassiter, thank you so much for joining us. We're honored to have you on board. For this special episode of Tar Heel Teachers at Home, we are chatting with Senator Deanna Ballard from North Carolina Senate District 45. She's here to discuss a variety of current educational topics as we continue to unpack the budget, Leandro, and more. Senator Ballard, welcome to Tar Heel Teachers at Home.
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to join you guys this evening. Even this is kind of like the pregame warm-up before the big national championship, I think, coming up. So I am tickled to just really join you guys. Really eager to listen and to really answer questions that you guys might have there's been a lot of dynamics going on, of course, in the last 2 years, but even in the last decade. So I am eager to just be really, receptive to any concerns and questions that you guys might have, and will do my best to answer your questions and concerns.
We certainly appreciate that. We appreciate your willingness to engage in the conversation. So, Senator Ballard, you are one of the co-chairs of the Education and Education Appropriations Committees for the North Carolina Senate. Can you talk about your responsibilities in that role?
Sure. So I chair, as you mentioned, education appropriations and then policy as well. And then I also chair multiple other committees, but I do serve on over a dozen. But in terms of education specifically, I am really engaged across all sectors. That would be K-12, community college, as well as the UNC system. But really in terms of working on policy kind of initiatives that really are rooted in kind of the boots on the ground, what's coming up out of the field, folks that need help and concerns, or, what can we do better? What can we improve upon? Or what are even legislation that's really outdated and old that we need to look at? And then even in terms of funding, working with the House, and then of course my colleagues on the other side of the aisle too, in terms of just funding and the different sectors, and working with their initiatives and their priorities just across the whole education continuum. So even if you've noticed in this past session, we're still in the biennium, but even I've tapped into a little bit of the pre-K space, which is really more healthcare and HHS world, but with kind of our literacy efforts, we are trying to sort of do a little bit further alignment there in the pre-K world with our K-12 system. So my hands are in a lot of different things. There's a lot of different dynamics kind of going on. And then I will say that I think I have been the only chair in education that is still around from the beginning of the pandemic, from March of 2020. All of my House co-chairs, I think, have essentially no longer serving. And then I have new co-chairs in the Senate as well. So I've been a little bit of this common denominator, I suppose, during, especially even the last, 2 years, when things have really kind of taken a different, really kind of changed the culture of education at large.
So comprehensive, so many different moving pieces. And I know you're really keenly focused on that alignment across multiple sectors. So that's great. So looking back at 2021, what would you say are some of the successes as it relates to education here in North Carolina?
Oh my goodness. Education, it was a big year in 2021 for education. Even from the beginning of really trying to get our kids back into school and in-person instruction, working in collaboration with the governor's office on that was key and essential. Working on summer learning potential opportunities and ideas with the House. That was feedback coming in from the districts, really facilitating that. Another big win that was signed into law with us was the Excellence in Public Schools Act of 2021, which is really an updated, kind of version of a previous bill. But I would say a bit more comprehensive and a bit more targeted in kind of the science of reading, and even tapping into our UNC system sort of educator prep programs and how we're training our teachers moving forward. But as I mentioned previously too, it's really even creating an early childhood sort of department at DPI in terms of literacy. So those are kind of really big three, out of the gate. And then of course the session continued. We've been in one of the longest sessions we've had. But again, the budget is a big win, I would say, for education, just even across all sectors too. I mean, the fiscal year, 2021 is really like a 7% increase over the base budget. So about $1 billion more than what we've had. And then another 1.5 in the second year. So about 10% increase. So we've been able to kind of increase spend in education in this particular biennium thus far. So those are, just some solid wins too. So, there's a lot that goes on. We could talk higher ed, we could talk K-12, we could talk community colleges, but those are just kind of a few highlights.
So much going on, so much happened last year, and so much will happen this year as well in 2022. What questions do we have for Senator Ballard?
I'd be happy to start. Senator Ballard is in my district as well. And so I've been able to have coffee with her before, which is great because it's nice when you can have conversations with people who represent you. So Senator Ballard, I am actually part of the LETRS training through Appalachian State right now. And so I know I've been able to have some of that pre-knowledge that some teachers have not been able to have yet due to when the districts are rolling it out. And so it's very informative, and I know it also takes a lot of time. So I was just trying to see what kind of feedback you've gotten from districts that have been able to do it, with how teachers are able to do getting that accomplished while they're teaching in the classroom and meeting all the needs that are going on there.
Sure. I would say I've not heard a lot. I have heard a little bit of the struggle between, the amount of time it takes, which we knew was going to be kind of consuming on the front end, which is why there were additional dollars even put in the budget for those purposes too, to really help facilitate the training as well as just the needs for if there's any kind of missed job work time scenario that's happening. So really leaving that up to the districts to understand how to facilitate use of those dollars, but understanding that, the intent is we knew that this was going to be, on the front end, especially a bit more labor intensive. But as we go along, knowing that, the model itself will hopefully be fruitful and just train the trainer type program as we continue along. So I'll be honest, I haven't heard too much directly. I think DPI probably has heard a little bit more than I have. But I would say I'm eager. I hear a little bit more from DPI. Of course, they're going to want to paint a picture that everything's rolling out smooth and swimmingly and blah, blah, blah. Which I'm sure in some districts it is, but I also know just hearing from other, from folks a little bit more directly, there are challenges and it's a lot of work. And again, we're pivoting in the middle of trying to pivot during a pandemic. So there's a lot happening all at the same time, which we're trying to be sensitive. We're trying to understand how to kind of balance some of those sensitivities and those tensions too. So, but we do know this is a priority for us in this space with the literacy side of things, and then working with App State or the UNC system at large, because we're trying to get them in as early as we can, because I mean, that's just going to really help kind of train, our pre-teacher, folks. So, I mean, overall seems to be a little optimistic and maybe promising. So I'm eager. I do know there are teachers that are really excited about it. I have heard some of that, to have really kind of a direction and some solid, I guess, kind of content and training, and then professional development that will continue over the course of the 2 years. So I think that's encouraging. But, again, as it rolls out with the districts, the first cohort of districts are definitely going to have it harder than I would say the second or the third, because, you learn things along the way, best practices. So
I have one follow-up question. That was a great answer. Thank you. I appreciate that. One follow-up question with that. I have talked to a couple of teachers in different areas of the state who have already started as well. And one of the things that they kind of were wondering is they've seen how science of reading and they've seen how this LETRS training can help students, but then they see the programs that are sometimes being implemented in the districts don't align with what they're learning now. And so do you have any advice for those teacher leaders who would like to be able to help bring around change and to help implement some of these best practices that they know would help their students?
Yeah, I've talked to DPI a little bit about this, because we've heard of some pop-ups, sort of other things that are going on. And we're like, but the whole point is to really align the science of reading even across the continuum. So what we're trying to do is get DPI to really dive into those districts to help them figure out, okay, if this is kind of an offshoot or another kind of tactic to kind of tackle literacy, I really want it to be rooted in, the intent is for it to really be rooted in the science of reading. So we are kind of aware. I've heard a few things about that going along, but then I also know I've tapped into DPI and mentioned that as well. So I think they are kind of alerted to those sort of, outlier type scenarios, but I am, trying to be optimistic that we can create some alignment. It's just going to take time. That's kind of the deal we all need to be sort of cognizant of. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And we know there's going to be challenges kind of, especially in this initial cohort, and with districts that maybe have some of their own ideas or have already been implementing something along the way. But again, we've tried to reiterate with DPI, and then we do have some oversight committee meetings coming up, I guess, starting in February. Well, we'll probably start to dive into some of that space a little bit more to ensure that the intent of the legislation and the science of reading and the LETRS training is kind of happening in a lot, along the way. So
thank you so much.
Well, thank you for what you do. It's good to see you again.
I'll jump in here. Senator Ballard, you listed a number of accomplishments, and I'd like to acknowledge another one, which is making Fayetteville State University the 4th college as part of the North Carolina Promise program. And you have, in your district, you border the state of Tennessee. And so I was going to ask you, you're on both, it's the Education and Higher Education Committee. And I was curious in terms of your role for appropriations and meeting the goals that are set forth in My Future NC, which you're a board member of, that we would be talking about. Are there other areas that the state legislature is going to be looking to do to sort of match, say, the Tennessee promise where all community college is free, and that even some four-year universities are free as well?
I would say I have looked at the community college, or we're continuing to look at the community college space and what that is. North Carolina is already really one of the more affordable community college systems like in the country. So what we did learn out of even some of, I don't know if you're familiar with, there was an adult learner initiative, a pilot project that kind of was started in the last 6 months in the community colleges, which really was targeting those like maybe students 25 and older, or folks who have not really completed a degree or a credential. And I will say Blue Ridge Community College actually tackled it and marketed it as a little bit more of like a free tuition scenario to really understand, like, how does this really, are we really capturing these folks? Are we really securing them, getting them back in? And they had a lot of success with that. I mean, they've seen increase in enrollment, as did a couple of the other community colleges using a little bit different tactics too. But one thing I have asked for a little bit more research on with legislative analysis and in kind of our nonpartisan staff that we have at the General Assembly is what would that look like? What is the impact of whether it's even a reduced community college or a free community college sort of scenario? But it's not something I would say in the UNC system I've tapped into anymore. I mean, adding Fayetteville State just happened to be kind of working out financially, I guess you could say, in that space, and was someone that was interested in it previously. And so that's kind of how that kind of developed even more, I would say, over a half too. But I would just say it's fair to say that, I mean, it is something that we are continuing to look into. So, and there's been some success in how you market that with community colleges as far as the free tuition, even in North Carolina now. I mean, it's one thing to look at Tennessee, and we always look to other states too, but knowing in North Carolina kind of how it affected and impacted potential increases in enrollment. But I think we all have to remember, even with community colleges, it's not just enrollment that we're interested in, but it's completion. And I mean, that's one thing I'm trying to help the community colleges really make sure they're focused on and steered towards too, because that's how we're going to reach that attainment goal with My Future NC, and that's through completion. And whether that's, how we factor in some of the workforce training program certificates a little bit more into those numbers, and not just sort of, the academic or, that space, then, we'll kind of see. So,
thank you very much.
Sure.
First of all, Senator Ballard, thank you for your time, and I definitely appreciate your work for pre-K. Both of my kids, Caleb and Addie, well, Addie's in NC pre-K now, and Caleb was in there, and he's a great reader. He's in second grade, and they were both eligible for it because my husband's in the military. So thank you for your work with that. A question that I have for you, you mentioned earlier talking about some outdated laws, and an issue in my county is the August 26th, like having to start around that date. Because we have to do that, we can't really align with our community colleges when they start. And so some of our high school kids that when their semester one ends, they have maybe 3 weeks less time than the kids that are in the second semester, because we have to start around August the 26th. Can you share like why that is like the magic date, and why the state doesn't give, I guess, the counties more responsibility in, picking the date that works best for them?
So, some of that predates me and my service into the Senate, unfortunately. There have been a time, I don't know if during the pandemic, I was able to sort of play with that a little bit more in terms of the start date on the calendar, and afford districts a little bit more room in that space to be able to get exams in by Christmas. But then there are districts that already are able to do that. So this is what we are trying to fish out, I guess, a little bit more, that there are districts that are able to kind of work with their community college system, and or so have been in the past from what we've told. And then I'm also trying to work with community college system on some of their calendar and kind of what parameters or barriers they have on how they set their schedule too, in order to sort of provide maybe a little bit more alignment in that space. But I would just say that that's kind of an ongoing problem we're trying to figure out how to solve and how to support moving forward. But again, those are kind of issues that predated me that I sort of jumped into a little bit as well, and just was able to sort of at least provide kind of a temporary fix for that during some of the COVID, which districts have noticed and mentioned. But then also just trying to figure out how to make that a little bit more effective, I guess, in the long term. So, I mean, that's just things we're still trying to work out and see what we can do.
And I'm glad that conversations continue to happen, because some of those districts that are able to align with community college, they have a shorter first semester than their second semester, and would love to have a balanced calendar.
Yeah, and some of that's why we're trying to figure out how to incorporate more of the remote learning a little bit to count as school days too. And that's kind of the impetus, a little bit of what I was trying to get at during some of the COVID, and how it's not necessarily teacher work days, but then there are remote learning days. How does that really look and work, and counting towards the actual number of school days or hours, as we know the law sort of stipulates too. So just know that I think there's more brainstorming and things continuing to be fleshed out. So we'll just have to see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my question was centered around calendar flexibility, but you have answered that question. So I'll pivot and talk a bit about where we are as educators. In my role, I am constantly seeing where we're struggling as a district to staff our schools. So has there been any conversation in the legislature about addressing the teacher shortage in North Carolina by way of salary, by way of reinstating master's pay, possibly extending the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program to additional universities, other incentives? So I'd be very interested in hearing, Senator Ballard, if there's any conversation addressing where we are, because with COVID, coronavirus, it's going to be a lasting impact to the profession, and we're feeling it now, given what has already happened in the last 10, 20 years in our legislature. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Sure. In terms of teacher pay, I mean, of course, in the last budget, there was a pay raise for most state employees, and then an average 5% pay raise for teachers over the biennium. But then in addition to that, we also had a $100 million bucket of money that we did kind of to help districts or counties really with their supplemental funding. So I'm not sure, how familiar folks might be with that, but there was kind of a formula that was stipulated in terms of using even kind of median, it was county tax base, your median household income, and then the effective tax rate. So to come in and be able to help a lot of those counties who have to compete with your, bigger urban counties, and really retaining and recruiting teachers too, which has been really, I mean, we've heard a lot from a lot of different folks on this, but it's been really encouraging for a lot of our rural counties across the state. I mean, for example, Allegheny County or even Ashe County, they had $500 or $600 local supplement bonus. But then now based on this, I mean, Allegheny County could technically get up to almost a $3,000, sort of supplemental bonus that helps support what the county's putting in. So what this extra $100 million is really doing is really trying to recruit or to retain even what teachers we have, but also use as a recruiting mechanism so that folks who, aren't just going to immediately leave and move to some of your like your Mecklenburg, your Buncombe, or your Wake County kind of school districts. I mean, so that's kind of one area. I mean, we are trying to be intentional here and targeting that. We did invest in, I think it was the North Carolina teacher platform for recruiting as well. That's at DPI. We put money into that space. We've even looked at, I mean, we increased dollars for the certified personnel. So when you're looking at your school bus drivers and your nutrition workers, we increased the minimum wage to that at $15. So I know that's not in the teacher realm, but I mean, also just in terms of school community and school support, that's important. So, I mean, there's just kind of I would say a lot of different ways that districts could use and leverage some of this in order to recruit and to retain teachers too. And I know that is something that, we're eager to, clearly, it's a priority and we're intentional about being a part of as well. So I'm hopeful that I'm optimistic that will be kind of, hopeful moving forward. Teaching fellows, we did kind of we expanded that a little bit in terms of institutions to offer the program in the last biennium as well. So we're making some headway there, I think, as well. I've been a part of that interview process with candidates. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually. So I'm excited about kind of how that, will continue to grow and to develop too. So anything that, tapping into like our EPPs and how to better support them and getting those teachers into some of those unserved counties is what we're really, efforts in trying to do. And, I protected Teach for America too. In the budget, I think the House had some other ideas there, but I really come back in and was really being supportive of their efforts and getting those, getting teachers into those classrooms too in those counties. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Those things certainly do help us, and we appreciate your work and your energy towards doing that. I do have a follow-up question, if I may. Is there any conversation as a retention tool or recruitment tool to reinstating health benefits to those, in terms of reinstating health benefits for those that retire, that entered the profession after 2020? Is there any conversation about that? That was a outstanding tool for recruitment and retention.
Yeah, we have not had that conversation, I would say, recently in the last year. I do think in the long term, based on our conversations with the treasurer's office, it becomes a bit of a financial, it becomes like an unfunded liability kind of situation. And so we're not sure, even with state employees, like how that really looks moving forward. So, I mean, that's just one thing. I'll be honest, we have not talked about. In terms of your master's pay that you talked about too, just to follow up on that, I would say that it's something that I continue to sort of dive into and roll up my sleeves on to figure out what we can do in that space, though data tends to argue a little differently, and that's what I'm arguing with a bit, and presents itself that it doesn't really affect kind of student outcomes in the classroom. So I'm trying to really sort of dive into that, roll up my sleeves a little bit more and figuring out what we can do in that space, even if it's a little bit more specific to, certain areas of study perhaps, or something like that. So just know I don't really sort of give up easily on certain things, because I'm very like investigator by nature and inquisitive and natural curiosity. So I'm always sort of trying to figure out what can we do, in certain spaces. So just know that continues to be in my mind as well.
Thank you, Senator Ballard.
Other questions?
I do have another question for you, Senator Ballard.
Sure, Kelley.
I have a lot of teacher friends who are exhausted and are told, well, you should do self-care. And so that is easy to be said to somebody, but then helping them to be able to promote that and to do that. And so do you have any advice for people who are on the front lines right now in education, working hard to help their students, and they're really struggling with their self-care? Is there some word of advice that you could give them?
That's tough. My mom's in the same scenario. Yesterday I was just talking to her on Sunday, and she's getting ready for the week as well. So I do think it's tough. I even have a hard time during this time with with pandemic and during COVID, and taking time for myself. But surround yourself with good support systems. I think your school community is incredibly important, which is why I'm a big believer in a lot of those kind of wraparound sort of services too that are offered, and just being able to sort of afford, that encouragement and then that extra shoulder to lean on when needed as well. I think that's tough. Self-care is tough, I think, for any individual, no matter what sector you're in, because everybody's, it's a pretty demanding time right now. For our healthcare workers and, even for elected officials, but our restaurant, small business owners. So I would just encourage folks to know that I think it makes a world of difference and is incredibly critical and important right now that our kids are in the classroom and receiving that in-person instruction, and think that, personally, I just, based on what science is telling, science supports it. And then I think we can do it. I think we have proven, the education culture has proven that self to be really resourceful and able to pivot. And so I just want folks to be able to, have confidence in what they're doing, and knowing that, it does make a difference and it makes a big impact. There's no better, I guess, in sort of investment right now in terms of kind of what we're doing. I think it'd be doomsday I'll be honest. I think it'd be a little bit of a doomsday if we were to go back to almost like a fully remote sort of scenario again. Because I just know way too many teachers that were eager to be back in the classroom. I know teachers that are parents that are like, struggling with that balance too. So that's not lost on me either. But just stay focused, stay fixed on the end goal. And that's what I'm trying to do too. It's hard.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Very hard. Senator Ballard, talking about your mom, I know she was a TA for 16 years in Lincoln County before she made that transition and received her bachelor's degree in elementary ed and transitioned to the classroom. Are there any conversations about expanding TA to teach programs and really using that as a vehicle to plug some of these holes?
That's something I'm still watching. When we look at even the dollars and through the budget process, I'll be honest, there's not a lot of counties that have taken advantage of that as much as you might think. So that's been part of the issue is there have not been a lot of TAs that have gone through and then continued through the program to the teaching profession and into the classroom. So regarding that program, that's something that we're watching in regards to the level of interest. It has sort of waned over in recent years. And so you'll probably see it's going to kind of remain a little bit more probably steady or flat for a little bit, just to see if there's anything further we need to be doing to enhance it or to enhance the interest or to support the districts in figuring out how they're, communicating it, or even if folks know about it. We're just not quite sure kind of what is happening in that program itself. So we'll just continue to probably watch that with DPI.
I know for my county, Craven County, our head of HR, she was talking about using those funds or that program to kind of reimburse our TAs so that they can go to college and become teachers. And last year, or I don't know if it was the year before last, because all these 20s, they kind of run together. But Craven County Schools, we had like a conversation with minority teachers and just trying to keep minority teachers in the county and trying to figure out what are some things that the county could do to make sure that teachers were comfortable, to make sure they felt welcome and things like that. And in that conversation, they found out that a lot of the teachers in our county were subs before, which was me. I came in lateral entry, and or they were TAs before. And so I think that that program is like really promising, not just in recruiting teachers, but recruiting minority teachers.
Yeah, and maybe there's something we can do a little bit more targeted or intentional, even in kind of the minority teacher space. Then if that seems to be the subset of population that is really, latching onto it, that's something to think about. But yeah, it's been interesting to see how many teachers kind of started or TAs started and then don't really kind of continue on and follow through with it, which is one thing we're trying to figure out. Why then is there a lack of continuation or completion? Again, so I mean, that's just something, those were questions I was asking even in the fall, try to figure out as we were going through the budget too. So those are good points, Arnita. I appreciate that.
Senator Ballard, are there any conversations about providing tuition support to really increase the number of school psychologists? I know the state has allocated funds for us to be able to have these positions, but who are we going to get to fill the positions? We continue to have a shortage of school psychologists. So what can we do to increase the number of school psychologists that are serving in our schools?
Well, we also did include a recruitment fund in the budget too for that. So some of that we're leaving to DPI and our educators to really kind of needle through and thumb through to figure out what are the best ways to utilize those dollars in order to recruit those needs across the state itself. You'll notice we did do we're trying to allow room for folks to have at least like one. And we know that the pipeline is thin. I mean, we know that, we understand that. But then what this is doing is it really helps us understand where it's going to be like a shortfall. I mean, whereas before it's all sort of roped into sort of, a bigger bucket and you have no idea how to peel out what are the counties that really are in need or not even able to contract out services, because this is also what you can do in terms of this money too. But that's also, I mean, what we're trying to get at, a part of it is, by setting aside a separate allotment for school psychologists and then even a recruitment, is trying to figure out, okay, well, now we should be able to understand a little bit better about, okay, where are our hardest areas to fill and to serve, to know how to even drill down into a little bit more targeted incentive efforts in that space. So, I mean, it's kind of a phased approach probably. I mean, from my thinking, I can't speak for others, but I just know in conversations, the only way we can get to some of this information and data that we need is to just, put it out there and then figure out what's going to be taken and not taken to know kind of what next steps might be.
I'm glad to hear that.
If I may, I really appreciate your attention to details and the focus on the science. And I think one area that we can all agree on is child nutrition and the importance of kids being well fed. And COVID has really sort of opened the underbelly of how many families are in need. And I was really struck by your background doing your advanced work for the President and First Lady with Secretary Page, as well as for your work with Samaritan's Purse. And my question for you is, we know the USDA has given waivers for free food for breakfast and lunch through the end of this year, but there's states out there like Maine and California who have taken the next step and said that even after the pandemic's over, that we're going to commit state resources to make sure that kids get fed going forward. Is this something that the state legislature is looking into, and that we can ensure that not only can we get kids in school, but we're going to make sure that they're fed as well?
I think what's safe to say is we have been looking at this. We've been trying to track with DPI on kind of how the local school nutrition centers have been running, the funding that's been in place for them, what they really lack, what students are being served, what are not. We've heard so many different stories throughout the pandemic of parents, of families who were like sort of in a better position to provide for themselves, but yet we're still receiving foods that were really kind of available for those that are not as maybe in abundant need, or able to secure their own kind of services too. So what we're trying to do is really figure out what is kind of the base here of understanding who's in need, who's not in need, what is the quality of food? Each district, I'll be honest, each district is even offering a little bit of a different quality of nutrition. And I think I have a little bit of a problem and concern with that too. So we're trying to figure out what that is really holistically from this picture of, I think the pandemic's magnified this a little bit more in terms of what's really being offered, what's not being offered, who's really receiving and who's not receiving, or who's maybe receiving and really is taking perhaps maybe another opportunity from someone else. So those are questions we're asking about. We did do I think we ddid do a nutrition in the last oversight, maybe a year and a half ago. See all these 20s like it's running together. But I'll just be honest, I am diving into that. I'm diving into how some of those local school districts pick up additional dollars for those funds, or for those families too, and trying to figure out what the shortfall is in that space, which we've provided money for before in the budget. So I think that's just really kind of an ongoing effort. And I think if anything, the pandemic has done nothing but magnify kind of a little bit more. Let's pay attention to this. Is there something we need to be doing? Is the federal government going to come in and really kind of create a federal sort of program that's going to tap into this or not? Is the state need to complement it? Where are the districts at? There's just a lot of research and a lot of data that's still coming in from that to understand if we're in a position to be able to kind of do something in that space. And that's part of we had a reporting mechanism in the budget year before last, prior to the pandemic, that was really going to hopefully give us some information in this space, but it was vetoed. And then we had the pandemic. So we've been operating on these free waivers that's not really been able to provide any sort of information that we know kind of what to act on in the last 2 years. So that's part of the problem in that space. That's a complicated space, the nutrition space. People don't understand. I don't think, everyday kind of families and citizens understand what all is involved in that particular space.
Thank you, Senator Ballard.
Sure.
Senator Ballard, if I could, I'd love to ask you about Principal Licensure. There's some conversation centered around Principal Licensure, and I'd be interested in hearing more about that conversation, whether or not a licensure exam will be required. As you may know, there has not been an exam since 2011, and our schools have done a great job educating children with great leadership at the helm. And so I'm curious to know if there is what conversation is looming around that topic.
To be honest, I haven't had any recent conversations on principal licensure. We've had conversations on the whole teacher teacher licensure process that the Human Capital Roundtable has been a part of. We have had some conversation in that regard, which is a huge and a heavy lift in and of itself. But I can't say that I've been involved directly in any of that. I think licensure is a very complicated and cumbersome issue. And that's something that I really would love to figure out how to sort of streamline a bit more. And then just across the board, I mean, whether it's principals or whether it's teachers. So I don't really have much to offer you kind of in that space right now, to be honest with you. There's a lot going on. That's all I can tell you. And I mean, I can do one thing at a time.
I absolutely understand. And I'm an advocate that if principals have done such an outstanding job since 2011 to now, I'm not quite sure if a licensure exam is necessary. Right now, principals, I'm actually an adjunct at East Carolina and the MSA program, and we do a portfolio. And so right now, that portfolio at the end of their program is what determines whether or not, they obtain licensure, and it's work. So I just wanted to share that and just maybe sort of hear more about where the legislature was with it. So thank you.
I mean, I really do think that if there were anything, I guess, to change, I don't feel like we'd be like, I feel like folks would be grandfathered in who probably haven't, taken an exam or licensed. But I would say that's basically, every year, I feel like there's some new development in the principal space, and that is so annoying. And I know it must be annoying for y'all, but there is. And so I'm just trying to keep up with what even Senator Tillman was doing when he was here and trying to kind of sift through that as well. But anyway, just be on the lookout. But I don't anticipate anything other than what we've been doing through principal fellows or TP, any of that right now, major changes that I'm aware of. But that's just me. I might be out of the loop on something. So it happens.
Thank you.
There are so many things to discuss, so we know it's hard to keep up with all the moving pieces. So our last question for you, Senator Ballard, what are the most pressing issues that you hope are addressed in 2022? Educational issues.
Okay, so I mean, out of the gate this year, I'm still dealing with like COVID and remote instruction and what that looks like, and virtual academies, what that looks like, and then how do you count that towards school calendar? So I just know that my hands are really wrapped around that. My hands are wrapped around how the federal dollars are being spent. I mean, there's a lot of money. There's over $5 billion that came in just for K-12. That's just K-12. That's not community college. That's not, the higher ed space. So understanding how districts, again, a lot of that money went to districts. I mean, we were just the pass through. So how districts really use monies and ensuring that things were just really done, well and efficiently, which, I'm sure a lot of people were and are and continue to do. But there is a lot of money out there, and there are a lot of districts that aren't entirely sure like how to spend that much money, to be honest. And we've run into that. And so just knowing that we have I've been leveraging, I feel like I spent the last year leveraging a lot of dollars, like state dollars with the federal dollars and then the local dollars, and being smart, really wanting to be smart about how to really support one another and just the continuum of education. So, that was pretty intense. And I would say I can probably continue to do a lot of that. I would say, the community college, I tend to work a lot on workforce development. Really anything I can do to even better relationships between K-12 and the community college system. Sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of tension there. But, working through, I guess, continuing to kind of monitor and work through that space. And then I've did a lot with SEAA, which is our Education Assistance Authority, the financial aid sort of conduit for the higher ed. But they do a lot of the K-12 scholarships, children with disabilities, the ESAs and the opportunity scholarships too. And really, oversight on a lot of those things, because we did a lot of stuff in the budget in that space too. So, and we've really, for the first time ever, I don't know if folks are really aware of this, but we actually had monies dedicated to the student education or state education, SEAA, Assistance Authority, to sort of facilitate kind of their growing needs there. And I mean, that was kind of a first, actually. I mean, they're kind of part of the UNC system a little bit, but often sort of a bit of a stepchild too. But they manage so many federal programs and scholarship programs, financial aid programs from, you know, the feds even, that we were trying to come in and support them. So I would say a couple of those things, and then just the continued really kind of teacher recruitment, retention, working. I'm fascinated by the EdCore setup and continue to track that, and how that can be fruitful in kind of this high impact tutoring scenario that we have going on. And then of course the literacy will continue to really figure out if there's anything in that space we need to enhance. But I would say I've already been in conversations about licensure, and that those tend to be very consuming and very big and pretty heavy lifts. So I know the state board's looking at that. So I don't know, we'll kind of see what really develops on that end of things. But those are just a few. I'm always working, I can tell you that.
Well, we appreciate you coming on and chatting with us and giving us this update, and you have an open invitation to come back and engage with us. It's really important for policymakers to continue dialoguing with educators, and so we appreciate you modeling that tonight.
Sure, anytime. Be glad to come back sometime.
Thank you so much, Senator Ballard. We'd also like to thank our audience so very much for watching our program. We hope that you will continue to engage us on our social media platforms. Please like our Facebook page. Please follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TarHillTeachers. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Visit our website, tarhillteachers.com, and use our hashtag TarHillTeachers so we can find all of your great comments. We'd like to thank our wonderful group of co-hosts for joining us for this conversation: Kelley Wilson, Arnita Morris, Brian Link, and Dr. Steve Lassiter. We'd like to thank our virtual audience so much for joining us, and we'd like to thank our special guest for joining us, Senator Deanna Ballard from North Carolina Senate District 45. We look forward to seeing you next time on Tar Heel Teachers at Home.